Thank you. Okay, everyone, welcome back to live meeting in ReMicS. This is really nice. It's like seeing friends again for a very long time. So I know some of you met before Christmas, but at least for me, it's first time to see a lot of you in a long time. So it's really nice. We have tried to keep this network alive during pandemics. It has not been that easy. I think Hanne has done a remarkable effort to keep us seeing each other digitally. Then you had a meeting physically before Christmas, so I think that was good. And we hope now to see each other more and more physically on a regular basis. So that's really the intention. And today it's a hybrid meeting, so I think everyone in the physical meeting is present here, and I see more and more people now connecting also online, so that's nice. So I think I'll leave the floor now to Johannes, who will introduce the speakers.
Thank you very much, Marius. So good to see everyone online and here. Extremely happy today to present today's topic. The field of microbiota medicine is evolving, and research on microbiota medicine at least. And we're very happy to see that the whole cancer field has become interested in this field where it's, I would say, rapidly evolving, and perhaps one of the first places we will really see some clinical breakthroughs. That's at least what we hope. And today we will hear about I would say a fantastic, impressive effort by Jon Amund Kute and his PhD student, Andreas Ullern, and setting up a trial on fecal microbiota transplants for immunotherapy in non-responders. So we are very eager to hear about this. So please, the floor is yours. And for everyone online, you can put questions in the chat, I think, and we can see how we solve this on the way.
Thank you, Johannes. Thanks for the nice introduction, and thanks for the invitation. And thanks to you for all these emails. Before saying anything more, Jon Amund Kute is my name, and Andreas Ullern here. Those that are on Zoom, since I'm now using a different microphone, can you still hear me? If one of you, please respond. Yes, great. So, yeah, I think you have to share screen. Yes. Okay. It didn't pop up actually. Okay, can you which it may be that they see the screen, and you already see the screen with the MITRIC in presentation view? Those that are on Zoom? No. Why doesn't it? Oh, here it is. Here it is. I just didn't. Let's see. And then share or this one. I'm not sure. No, it's probably this one.
Yeah, that should work.
Okay. You now see it in well, it's more in the presenter view, I think, isn't it? I should perhaps try once more. Do you see the slides now? Yeah, it seems so. Okay. So yeah, it's great to be able to talk about this trial that we have worked on planning for a few years. This is a cancer immunotherapy trial, and I know not all of you work with it, though some know a lot about it. But okay, the main thing here is that we try to do something that is very, I think, difficult, but also very important, which is try to move patients from non-responders to responders. So this goes kind of beyond the personalized medicine, which normally is to select those that will respond, which is also important, of course. But I think it's even more interesting to try to do an intervention that could potentially move the non-responders into being responders. So I will start, and then Andreas Ullern, who is an oncologist in training, and a PhD student, and working at the trial unit, will continue. So you see here in MITRIC, and I'll see if MITRIC, let's see. Yeah, okay. It's called microbiota transplant to cancer patients who have failed immunotherapy using feces from clinical responders. So that's the outline. I just try not to see. Here, I could switch to slides. Okay, since not all of you work with cancer immunotherapy, I'd like to take a few introduction slides on that. I could perhaps also quickly introduce myself as being a head of clinical department of clinical cancer research, doing clinical trials, and doing cancer immunotherapy research. Oh yeah, let's see. I should get this one away also, if I can manage. That's interesting. No. There it is. Fantastic. So in general, in immunology, as you probably know, there's a balance between immune activation and tolerance, which is relevant for not only cancer, obviously, but for autoimmune diseases, infections, and so on. And there are multiple mechanisms promoting immune activation, and also many mechanisms that are important for immunological tolerance, which is important, obviously, to protect against autoimmune diseases and so on. In the setting of cancer, we want to tilt this balance, at least when it comes to immune response against cancer, so that it is stronger. And if you go back a little, cancer, that has been the focus of cancer immunotherapy, doing vaccines that would increase the immune activation, and also giving cytokines like IL-2 that would increase the immune activation. Then it hasn't really produced many clinical responses. So what happened was that there was increased interest then in how about the tolerance mechanisms, which are important because tumors adapt to the host's immune system. So that even though the immune system may protect against development of cancer, by the time the patient actually becomes a patient, that cancer has been educated by the patient's immune system to escape that immune system. Meaning there are many mechanisms of immune suppression, immune tolerance that are important. So this was really the new thing that these guys did that got the Nobel Prize in 2018 for removing the brakes on the immune response. And it was kind of a bold thing to do because you would definitely be fearful of causing autoimmunity if you did something like that, because these mechanisms are not really cancer specific, though they are associated and upregulated in cancer. So this is Tashu Honyu and James Allison. And then for the PD-1 blockers and CTLA-4 blockers, which are the breakthrough drugs in cancer immunotherapy. Again, both of them taking away brakes on the natural immune response. And so this is the kind of basis for the trial we're going to do. That's why I want to explain it. And I'm showing this one, which is the clinically most important mechanism. That's the PD-1 blockers. Some of you will know a lot about this, but perhaps not everyone. So I'll go through it. Here you see a T cell, and you see a tumor. And in principle, the T cell can eliminate the tumor if the T cell recognizes the tumor antigens and see that this is something foreign. So this can work. It probably happens without us knowing, protecting us against cancer. It happens in thousands of mouse models, but it rarely happens when you have a patient and you give, for instance, a cancer vaccine. And the reason being that there are mechanisms of tolerance. And one of the key mechanisms is this one, where the T cells upregulate a molecule called PD-1, and the tumor cells upregulate a molecule called PD-L1. And when they bind, there is no attack signal to the T cell. So the T cell will no more kill the tumor cells. It's a very powerful signal. It works on the tumor and it virtually shuts off the response. What they did then was to develop antibodies blocking the blocking. Antibodies that binds either to PD-1 or to PD-L1. And in fact, it restores then the ability of these immune cells to kill the cancer. The breakthrough in immunotherapy against cancer was really this drug, which was a CTLA-4 blockers. That's another mechanism, but I won't go into detail there. When I did my PhD, we had this is a survival curve. You see 100% of patients with metastatic melanoma, the most aggressive metastatic skin cancer. 100% are live hair, and then you see the time axis in years. When I did my PhD, it looked similar, but it was months. So that it really dropped dramatically, the survival. And we could give any kind of chemotherapy, and it's worth knowing no chemotherapy has ever been shown to increase the survival of these patients by a single day. So you get perhaps a short-term response in 20–30% of patients, but you don't get any long-term benefit. Therefore, it was very interesting when at the trial unit, we got these drugs, and we started to see that, most of these patients actually progressed, because that's the truth. There are still actually some really long-term responders that are probably cured. I know they have a nearly 20 years follow-up from the first patients, so that you get suddenly a tail of long-term responders with this drug, and that was a major surprise. And then the PD-1 blockers come on, and we got these steady improvements, so that these curves are now looking even better with nivolumab, which is a PD-1 blocker, or the combination of the CTLA-4 and PD-1 blockers. All of them actually taking away then these immune checkpoints that are mechanisms of tolerance, antibodies being used for this. So that you can see, if you just imagine a kind of curve dropping like this, and you look at where we are now, you understand that this was the Nobel Prize thing. This is important. It's not a common thing for cancer doctors to get anything new, actually, that works like this. And because of that, this has happened, that this new drug has been approved not only in one cancer form, but in many cancer forms. It's not as efficient in every cancer form, definitely not. But you can still see here from metastatic melanoma, it's less than 10 years ago. This is the approval for the PD-1 blockers. No, 8 years ago. It's not such a long time. And you see, it's a long list there of different cancers, very common cancers like lung cancers and so on, where this is now being used. It's not equally effective everywhere, but still you see that it's important. And it's also, if you compare the side effects compared to many other drugs, chemos, for instance, it's much less. So it's not only survival and responses, it's also really quality of life survival. Okay, so that's the background. Then if I go back now to the previous slide, there's an obvious problem here. Because if we're actually in these patients here dropping, if you're one of the droppers, it's not much use, is there, that there are others out there. So we want to do something about these ones, those that do not respond. And there are many, many ways, to try and refine, and you work on these. And there's a tendency always that those that respond to something respond to the next line of drug and next line of drug. Often there are some responders, and there are some that just don't respond to anything. So we think it's extremely interesting to see what we can do for these ones. And that's why we started this trial. And Andreas, you can explain why the microbiota has something to do with it, we hope.
Thank you. I can try at least. So my name is Andreas Ullern. So what are the evidence linking the gut microbiota to response or non-response in cancer immunotherapy? So I like this figure, 4 lines of evidence. So first, antibiotic treatment is associated with poor efficacy of immunotherapy. That is shown in many trials, many studies all over the world, but in mostly retrospective studies. So it seems like giving antibiotics, which obviously affects the gut microbiota, leads to not only reduced response, but also to reduced overall survival. So that could, of course, be explained by the fact that these patients needing antibiotics, they are sicker in the first place. That could be, but it could also be that the antibiotic treatment somehow gives some dysbiosis, which impairs the effect of immunotherapy. So in animal models, in mice models, there seems to be a causal link. So mice given antibiotics, they have also reduced response. And then the second line of evidence is this gut microbiota signatures. So like, of course, in many diseases, researchers have collected stool samples and sequenced these samples and correlated the data to the clinical outcomes. And in many trials, researchers have found taxa related or associated with response and non-response. But across all these trials, there are only a modest overlap. So there are no universal microbiota signature associated with response yet. We have no fecal biomarker. But I guess that is common in this field of research. The next line of evidence is FMT experiments in mice. And then I think that is stronger evidence because you move from kind of association to maybe causation. Yeah, and the last line of evidence is FMT in cancer patients. But if there have several groups have done studies like this on mice. So tumor-bearing mice, either germ-free or heavily antibiotic treated, you perform fecal transplantations from cancer patients receiving immunotherapy from both responders and non-responders. And then you give these mice PD-1 blockade. And in many of these experiments, it seems like that mice receiving FMT from responders, they also respond better to immunotherapy compared to mice receiving FMT from non-responders. And that is, of course, very interesting. And then you could move on to cancer patients. And as far as I know, these are the only 2 trials published on FMT in cancer patients, both in melanoma, published in Science last year. So the basic design is the same. Melanoma patients that have received immunotherapy and then progressed. And then you perform FMT and reintroduce immunotherapy and see what happens. Is it possible to convert non-responders to responders, as Jon Amund talked about? And it was first in human trials, so it was small trials. One study from Israel with 10 patients, and one study from the United States with 15 patients. And in both these trials, the fecal donors were melanoma patients with an excellent response to immunotherapy. And they gave FMT by colonoscopy. And in one of the trials, they also followed by oral capsules. And I mean, the main objective in these first in human trials, it's safety, and it was safe. But also, it was very interesting that a subpopulation of the patients actually seemed to respond after FMT. So 3 patients had an actual objective response, 3 out of 10 in the study from Israel, and in the study from the United States, 3 patients had an objective response and 3 patients had stable disease. So I talked to this journalist last week from Nettavisen, and she was not very impressed. But if this really is true, it's quite amazing, I think. So FMT engraftment, so that the recipient stool kind of moves towards donor stool, that seemed very important for effect. So again, these are small trials, and there are things which can be discussed, but at least by some people, they regard this as a first clinical proof of concept that it's actually possible to overcome resistance to immunotherapy by FMT. So At least in my opinion, they are some very interesting signals, and this should support more studies like this. And that is what we are going to do with some differences. So the first thing we did was that we needed some fecal donors. And like the two trials, we decided that these donors should be cancer patients or former cancer patients with an excellent clinical response. We defined that as an objective response over 12 months. So that was not so easy, actually, maybe especially during a pandemic, but it was possible. We have patients on the clinical trial unit at Radiumhospitalet, which received immunotherapy in clinical trials several years back. I convinced three male patients in their 50s or 60s, 2 melanoma patients, and 1 patient with squamous cell carcinoma in the skin, either locally advanced, stage 3, or metastatic disease. They all received immunotherapy with either a complete or partial response. And this is months. So they had all long-term response. And especially my donor number 3, he is an excellent donor and have been donating very much. So now the freezer is full and we are ready to start the trial. Just a little bit about the donor screening. Some of you know this. Fredrik Emil is an expert. So we do this like Fredrik Emil Juhl and the other people here at the Donor Biobank at Rikshospitalet, and we use the same screening procedures as they do. So maybe not all of you are aware of this, but you screen the donors approximately in cycles of 8 weeks with microbiological screening. And if everything is okay, when you close the window, they donate feces in this window. And if everything is okay, when you close the window after 8 weeks, you can use this. And I have used the facilities here at the Donor Biobank at Rikshospitalet and at Johannes Lab to do this. So the MITRIC trial, we want to include cancer patients with a high probability of response to immunotherapy. So the criteria is that they have progressive disease under immunotherapy, but the cancer diagnosis should mean that they have a fair chance of responding. And then by modulating the gut microbiota, maybe we can turn some non-responders into responders. So it's melanoma patients, it's head and neck cancer, it's another skin cancer called squamous cell carcinoma, it's renal cancer, and it is something called microsatellite instability high tumors. So they have many mutations and usually respond very well to immunotherapy. Yeah. Study design. So this is a phase 2 single arm basket trial. Basket trial meaning we include different cancer diagnoses. We hope to include 20 patients and up to 5 FMT administrations. The 2 first will be given by colonoscopy here at Gastrolab Rikshospitalet, and then, if it works, more FMT treatments by enema. And this will be given in parallel with immunotherapy. So the same immunotherapy that they have progressed on. And up to 18 months of FMT treatments and up to 10 years of follow-up. And they will continue immunotherapy treatment until toxicity or disease progression. If they need antibiotics, it is possible to give additional FMTs. So key inclusion criteria: metastatic disease or local recurrence, not curable by standard therapy. As I said, progressive disease on immune checkpoint inhibitors and indication for further treatment. So some of the patients may have other treatment options, and it may be hard to enroll these patients in this trial. But other patients, they have maybe no other treatment options when immunotherapy failed. And we want to take a new tumor biopsy before the first FMT. These patients, they have to be in quite good shape. So life expectancy over 3 months. No serious ongoing adverse events related to therapy, and no systemic immunosuppressive medication. So what are the endpoints in this trial? The primary objectives are safety, of course, very important, and then response evaluation. Secondary objectives are feasibility. Is this feasible? And then other parameters of clinical response estimation, like progression-free survival, overall survival, and so on. And then implant and graft estimation, as I mentioned, seems very important in FMT trials. And we have several questionnaires, so like quality of life, pain, fatigue, and so on. We have, as you know, we'll talk about, an extensive translational program. I want to study changes in blood, gut, and tumor. So the study team, we are doctors and nurses from the clinical trial unit and other oncologists at Radiumhospitalet. Peter Holger Johnsen, FMT expert in Harstad, as many of you know, he is very important in planning this trial. Kjetil Garborg, gastroenterologist here at the hospital. Johannes Hov, as you know, also very important in the planning and everything in this trial, really. Safety, of course, very important in a trial like this. So we have an independent safety committee with 2 oncologists and 1 infectious disease specialist. So this is the design. So we, I mean, I've been almost traveling around to try to spread the word about this trial, and if the clinicians then write to us, we screen the patients by radiological examinations, and we want to take a new tumor biopsy, and then we plan that the first FMT, as I said, will be given by colonoscopy here at GastroLab, and then at the same time we want to take gut biopsies, and then the second FMT after approximately 4 weeks, also given by colonoscopy here at GastroLab. And we want the patients to come in between for biobanking. And in parallel, they will continue with immunotherapy at their local cancer center. It could be other places in Norway. And we will evaluate the response by CT scans. And if this works, if they respond, it's possible to get more FMT treatments given by enema. Yeah. Okay, Jonam, you want to say something about biobanking?
Yes, so you've already mentioned that we do some biobanking there at many time points, and obviously the background here is that it's you never know what you're going to see in the clinical responses, but no matter what we see or do not see, it's going to be very important to analyze what happens at the biological level, and with that purpose, we are quite extensive biobanking with tumor biopsies at multiple time points. So we take them 3 biopsies at each time point, 1 on formalin, 1 snap frozen on nitrogen, and 1 was cell suspensions. And this is to allow for different methods, like the conventional immunochemistry, like imaging mass cytometry, which is a Hyperion then, the trade name here. Nanostring, which are gene panels that can be run on formalin. For snap frozen, we will do proteomics and DNA RNA sequencing. And then on the cell suspensions, we have started in our trials doing single cell sequencing as well as advanced flow cytometry panels with 20 markers. In this way, we aim then to follow the dynamics, the immune evolution, the tumor evolution in the tumors. We will also get gut biopsies when they do the coloscopy, and we get them from different regions in the gut. We're going to collect fecal samples, obviously, and do the sequencing there to see, importantly, if there is engraftment of the donor microbiome into the into the recipient. We will collect the viable peripheral blood cells that we can analyze by imaging, cytometry, and cytoph, 40 marker panels, flow cytometry tests, I mentioned 20 marker SAM panels, and also functional assays. And then we collect plasma and serum for cytokine profiling by LumenX and cell-free DNA analysis. So this is just a slide just flashing off some of these methods, but this is like and with cytoph, this is when you want to look at the protein level at the different immune cell subs in blood or in tumor, it can be done this way, where you see that by this 40 marker panel, you get lots of different subpopulations. And you can look them, for instance, here more closely at the T cells, look at different T cells, and then zoom in on the regulatory T cells and look at different regulatory T cells and so on. So it gives a lot of options. Like this is then a clustering of different profiles that you can do essentially with whatever you do. This is with PBMC subsets, but it looks quite similar if it's a downstream gene panel from a tumor, for instance. Here you see different stuff, and here you see this imaging mass cytometry called Hyperion then, where what it's interesting is that one can do with up to 30 markers, essentially a cytoph on a slide, so that you can look with the spatial orientation of where the immune cells infiltrate in the tumor, how they co-localize with the effector cells and regulatory T cells and so on. And as I said, the point of all of this is really that whatever happens, it's going to be very interesting to see if can we really change the microbiome profile by this regime. There are so many choices. You could do it by coloscopy, you could do it by gastroscopy, you could do it many times, few times, many questions. So it's important to have this assessment. It could vary, obviously, between the donors also. And we want to look at how the gut immune profile changes. Is there a local change there? We want to see if there is T cell infiltration in the tumor, for instance, that changes after therapy, and so on. So by doing this, we hope that whatever the clinical results will be, obviously we hope for responses, but whatever happens, it will be very interesting to see how the responses relate to these biological changes. And it may inform how this therapy may be developed. Is there a need for more transplants, and should it be given in a different way, and so on. And this is an important slide because here is Andreas' cell phone number and email. And it's open 24/7, isn't it, Andreas? No. almost. No, but we need the right patients, obviously, to come here to our trial unit. And for other news, you can look other places, but we obviously want to get the right patients referred to the trial. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for a very nice talk and overview of this courageous, very brave trial, I would say. Questions from the audience? There's a question here. Fredrik.
Thank you for a nice talk, Andreas. Yeah, my name is Fredrik Emil. I was called an expert here. I don't really agree there, but thanks. I have two questions. First, when talking about the 4 pathways, or for like why this is rational, And then there was this antibiotic treatment.
Hmm.
Did they look at the interaction or possible interactions between the antibiotic and the cancer or chemotherapy or immunotherapy? I don't know that much about the cancer drugs, but I know that many antibiotics can influence SIP, for example. So that was the first question. And then the other question is, why are mixing enema and colonoscopy as the administration method? Wouldn't that make the interpretation of the results more difficult? Thanks.
Yeah. For the first question, yes, I think that they have looked at things like that. And what I've read, there seems to be if you collect stool samples on patients receiving chemotherapy, it's not the same association. But I think it's hard to draw a clear causal conclusions in retrospective data like that. But and I have not read all the studies, but I think they have tried to look at interactions like you mentioned. When it comes to the colonoscopy, I think there are different aspects on that, but of course colonoscopy is it's not so fun. There may be, and you may correct me on, but there may be some practical considerations there as well, maybe. But as far as I know, that there are no data indicating that maybe one method is better than another. I don't know.
Yeah, we will have. I was unsure if I actually turned my mic off now. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. No, it's because the colonoscopy is more an invasive procedure, simply. So what we have done is to put that procedure up front with two FMTs, so that we can see if there is a response, and only the responders will then actually go on to get any more. And we will have a control there with the fecal sampling, so that we see what is the effect of the coloscopies, and the new fecal samplings at later time points, we can see if these other enemas, if they have any effect, right? So I think we'll get information there, but it's really because of the lack of provenness of the therapy that we didn't feel that we could just continue giving the coloscopies repeatedly. There can be a perforation, for instance. These patients can be, quite vulnerable to these things. And the other, so that's the main reason. And the other reason is actually the resource question also. Obviously, we're going to stretch the capacity for the gastroenterologists more if we want to have every patient coming very frequently for the coloscopies.
I guess one alternative could be to have enema only, but
yes.
An important idea here was to also the translational aspects, to have to be able to look at what's going on in the gut during this therapy, and also then design it the way that everyone will actually have 2 colonoscopies. So we will be able to see whether there is a change in the mucosa, for instance, in all the patients, whether they respond or not. But it's clearly this trial won't be able to answer what is the right way of doing it, for instance.
Just one question, and then you'll we can start with your question now. Follow.
What's the median time for responding to immunotherapy like PD-1? The median time?
It's a few weeks actually. With PD-1, it's not so slow. So it's a few weeks. But in this setting, we wouldn't know, obviously, because here we have patients that have received PD-1 blockers and then they have progressed on it, and then we will turn the profile, hopefully. So it would be hard to know exactly. But what we will do is that as long as the patients do not progress further, they will continue in the study, receive the checkpoint inhibitors and so on. So whether or not the change comes quickly in terms of response, if we see that there is no further progression, they will continue, and they could potentially then get obviously response after a year or something, as long as there is a kind of steadying of the situation. But the PD-1 blockers is usually quite quick.
I just want to say that I'm very impressed with the whole setup. I mean, it's really bold what you're doing, and also I think the translational part is very comprehensive and will give a lot of information. I just have one question. I mean, you put a lot of effort into this trial, and it's always difficult to get patients in the trial and to recruit them and to fill the sample size. I mean, we talked a bit outside, but would you consider sampling almost all patients referred for immunotherapy to kind of get the background feeling of what are the immune responses, what is the interaction with the microbiomes? I think one could predict here from the 20 patients that if it's successful, maybe 5 or 6 patients will respond, and maybe they will have got donation from the same donor. I mean, that's one possible interpretation. Then maybe you could get some more information if you also had samples from more patients that were either responding or not responding to look for microbiota factors or other things that could be of value. It's a question and suggestion.
I think we're grateful for a suggestion, and it's we have considered that, and we may do it. You know, it's not. It's obviously could be interesting. What is the setting right now is that others have done quite a lot of that in melanoma. So I don't think we'll go into doing that in melanoma and repeat what's done in large studies. It could be of interest to do it in some of the other cancer forms that are included in this basket trial. When we haven't, but we do have samples from breast cancer trials, as I mentioned, 2 breast cancer trials. So I think we will first go about analyzing them and see what we get from that. And then potentially we could set up such an observational study. But as you know, it would require then sampling, patient-informed consent, clinical data collection, all these things, right? But it's absolutely, yeah, it could be interesting.
I think just to follow up on that, you could, you know, our experiences with studies with samples from different countries, they really suggest that there are major differences in gut background microbiome in different countries. And when we had a study including ulcerative colitis, mucosal biopsies from Canada and Norway analyzed at the same place with the same methods, the major factors determining the microbiota composition was actually site of origin. So you could argue that there is a need for a Norwegian validation, at least with national findings, because you could have other bacteria occupying these niches or doing the same things that some other bacteria do elsewhere. So that's important to keep in mind. And also, if you want to apply for money, it's a reason for doing things here.
Hi, I'm Petra from Johannes Group. I have one question. You said that you have 3 donors from responders. So are you going to use all 3 in different patients or pooled ones?
In the protocol, we have written that ideally the patients will get a donation from a donor with the same cancer diagnosis. So that will probably not be possible, because one of the donors stands for 70%, 80% of the donations. And there were some things about the first donor, some CMV stuff in the blood, which means I'm not entirely sure we can use him. So the fact, I mean, I've got like 70, 80 treatments now. I've stopped. I think we should start to try to recruit patients and see what happens. But in reality, most of the donations is from one donor. Yeah.
One question more. Are you collecting the fecal samples anaerobically and work anaerobically, or just into some bucket and it will be delivered here?
Well, you have seen me, haven't you? So I have no pictures now, but it's this chair, and then they do their thing, and I collect it in a bag, and I go to our room, right? So it's yeah.
And if those bags that are important are in that anaerobe part, isn't then a problem with the collection? I know that it's quite, well, I'm collecting anaerobically and it's a hassle. So I understand the point, but still, if those that are important are in that part and they will not be able to colonize them.
If they die when they are exposed to air, that is possible. So I mean, we have used the procedures from Peter in Harstad and kind of his way of doing this, and you know, so that they donate fresh feces here. So I think that approach is the best we can do, really.
Yeah. So the thing is that they actually deliver here, and the turnaround time is then very, very fast.
Yeah, it is.
Probably not seconds, but maybe minutes. So
yeah,
this is sort of, we had an external question also regarding this particular topic. So how do you make sure that all bacteria are viable?
I don't.
No. And I guess that's, we try to keep them alive as many as possible.
Yeah.
But you can't really ask the patients to deliver directly into an anaerobic bag or something.
No, I think this is part of what we will assess with the repeated sampling, right? That kind of part of the thing here. If we see that nothing changes in that profile, if we see that nothing's happened in the gut and so on, then it's a sign that something has to be changed. But if we see there is a good engraftment, if you see there is a provoking inflammation and so on, then that will give us the lead that
we are collecting.
Is not too bad.
We're collecting samples now for another project where we want viable bacteria, and they do it. These are individuals at home. Then they have a small plastic bag in the plastic box, and you have some anaerobic, some powder that generates an anaerobic conditions within this box, and then they send it here by taxi. But that's also quite resource demanding thing. So, and still they would have some exposure to oxygen also. It's not like you can avoid that.
No. But it's a good question because these are the kind of details. I mean, there are a lot of method development here, obviously, that remains, right?
Other questions? I wonder a bit, my final question is, and what's the bottleneck for including patients here?
Yeah, that's
well, you need to have patients, first of all, that can continue with their standard with this therapy. So you need to have an advanced cancer patient that do not have another therapy that she or he should have right now. And so that's the first thing. And if the disease is too aggressive, you know, then they will kind of deteriorate too rapidly. You have to think that they can get these coloscopies and can be followed. So these are things. If they live other places, they will have to travel here to do these things. But and there are of course other requirements in terms of blood levels and all this. If you have a low platelets, you can't send them into it, and all these things. But I think it's like in the normal thing in a trial, really. It's the many requirements that you think shouldn't be too bad. But in the end, there are so many that you end up with far fewer patients that you will ever believe. But I think we'll get enough patients still.
But we probably have some questions.
I think I was just one question. I mean, if they need to be fit enough for coloscopy, would it be possible to have kind of conditional requirement for colonoscopy and say that those who are progressing, still alive, not on other chemo eligible, but not fit enough for colonoscopy, they could be randomized, or not randomized, but include and get enema?
I think that will be possible. I think if we have started the trial as we have done, if we get enough patients, we will do it this way, because what we really want is to have a method that we believe is as optimal as we can to see if we can get some responders, right? We don't want to fill it up with patients that are unlikely to respond for other reasons. But obviously, if it happens that we don't get enough patients, then that's one of the protocol modifications we could do, right? To open. Yeah.
Right.
But I think it's important that we don't do a trial on 20 patients that are unlikely to respond for whatever reasons. That's why we have also narrowed into, for instance, head and neck cancer. They need to have 20% PD-L1 positivity, even though you can get it if you have 1% as a routine. So we want to kind of increase as much as possible, but without not having patients.
Very good. I think those are important comments. I think we still have time for a few more questions. There are someone in the audience. There is one from the chat. Merete Eggesbø asked why we stopped at 5 treatments. Or what was the rationale?
Well, in most of these, they only get the checkpoint inhibitors for 1 or 2 years. So if we think about how long you give the checkpoint inhibitors in these patients, we think we have kind of 18 months here with microbiota transformation. So it's so that's actually the starting point reason.
Very good. I think also we may have Marco on the line from Barcelona. Are you there, Marco?
Hello.
You have some questions?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, great. First of all, congratulations for the presentation. I'm Marco Sanduzzi. I'm a pathologist. I'm working on liver cancer, and I spent some months in Johannes' lab. So I just three comments. First of all, in the science paper, I mean, the patient with melanoma, of course, were retreated with FMT and also with immunotherapy, but I'm not an expert on that. But potentially patient with melanoma retreated with immunotherapy experience response after rechallenge. So to what extent it depends on FMT and to immunotherapy? The first question. I would just say that I am strongly convinced on the utility of FMT, but just from a critical point of view. And the second point is how to select donors. I mean, also in that paper, it was a difference among responders. So, I mean, in the fecal microbiota composition. So how to select one responders or another? And the very last question, and when to collect, do you think that during the evolution of the patient, there is a best time, or there are some difference to when collect the stool for the donation?
Yes.
I can try to answer the first question. So, because you asked if re-challenge with immunotherapy should induce some responses, right?
Yeah.
So in actually the two trials, they were a bit different. So in the trial from Israel, they accepted prior response, and then you had to have progressive disease and get FMT and reintroduce immunotherapy in the trial. And that is, as you said, correct. So that is one, you could criticize that trial on that, because some patients, if they hadn't prior response and you wait a sufficient amount of time, some patients will respond again if you reintroduce immunotherapy. So, but in the second trial from United States, they had primary refractory disease. So they had never responded to immunotherapy. And in that trial, I also had some responders, right? And so they shouldn't respond, really. So that was a more convincing trial. When it comes to selecting donors, that I mean, we haven't sequenced the stool from these donors. That they are just picked based on clinical response.
I think the answer is that you use whatever you have.
Yeah.
There are very few available, and these don't look at all like other donors for fecal transplants. This is people that have been through cancer therapy and so on. So if we have a few, let's hope they work and we can learn what works, and then we can do it another way. That would be my answer.
And the third question was about sampling time points.
Yeah.
I'm no expert on that, but maybe.
So is it the microbiota when they start their first immunotherapy that's important, or the one they have when they're done with their immunotherapy and have responded? Don't know.
But we have avoided those that have had antibiotics, for instance. There are some requirements in that we have tried, obvious pitfalls that we have tried to eliminate.
Okay.
Just a question for the future. I mean, if you show that there is a signal, but it's not perfect and it's donor dependent and so on, and this donor is not going to live forever and you need to find new donors, will it also be possible to have a new phase in the trial, for example, randomizing to this super donor and then also try to find other donors that are not responders, but that are healthy volunteers with a microbiota profile that resembles this? It's probably not that his or her microbiota has been through cancer that is successful. It's probably something in this profile that is inducing anti-tumor effects, cellular immunity, and so on. Any comments on that?
Yeah, we have actually considered a trial with young healthy donors even in parallel here, so though we haven't started for resource reasons. I think also agree that if we see efficacy here and others see efficacy, then I think trials like that and also other trials are going to follow. And it's we will do something and others will do something, hopefully. Yeah, but I think what really is important is to have these few pilot trials that can establish if this principle can work, and then also obviously going into just giving specific bacteria, specific modifications. I think the whole field will develop quickly if there are a few hits here.
Are there any more questions?
No, I think this covers it now.
Yeah, I just want to say in the end that I'm extremely impressed, and just looking back when we started ReMicS a few years ago, I think we had ambition to end up here with a donor biobank with a setup for bringing this into hospital and trials like yours. So it's really one step further to taking the microbiota into the clinics. So I think it's extremely impressive, and I'm very happy about this.
I would like to say that we are very grateful for this collaboration and environment, obviously. Otherwise, it's not possible to actually do it.
It's been really great working with you. I look forward to how it will progress. Hopefully soon we will see some patients enrolled. So thank you very much, everyone, for showing up. And let's hope it's not too long till next meeting, but it's probably week 37, September. And then there is a national conference on November. Let's check this before you leave now. We will send an email before summer. It's November 10th. Yes, there will be an email about the conference and abstracts soon. Okay, safe trips home, everyone. Thank you for coming. Så må vi da bli meeting. Jeg skal jo den stoppe recording.